All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Max Schmarzo podcast. We have a friend of the show today. He goes by two first names, and either one works for him. We're actually not quite sure what his first name was. Adam Bradley, or Brad, or Adam, or Bradley Barbell all work, apparently. I go ahead and say hi before I ramble on. I got a short story.
Can't forget some of the football guys used to call me Dirty Bradley for reasons we will not discuss in this podcast.
Off to a hot start. We hit the ground running today, and we actually I almost called you Brad. So I worked with Adam at Iowa State a little bit, but also we crossed paths at College, where you also went for a minute. And then we were in an ex-phys class together. And then we actually interned together with Coach Bo at Iowa State. And there you went by 17 different names. I had no idea what your first name was. Yeah. And I was very confused, but
you actually taught me too. You taught me too in the when we trained old people.
Yeah,
the Kaiser lab.
I was thinking about whether or not you're in my class in that, and I couldn't recall. Yeah. I thought you were, but then I didn't want to say that I taught you, because then you'd be like, no, you didn't teach me. And then that looks really bad versus you'd be like, Max, remember you taught me? And then that looks better on me versus like the assumption I taught you and being like, hey, remember when I taught you? And you're like, nope, you sure didn't.
I made this guy what he is today.
Yeah, that would have been so I opted for the safe route, and I'm glad that you meant. I thought I taught you, but I was like, man, like I don't remember. I know it was in the back of your ex-phys class. We sat back by Dr. King's class.
Yeah.
And then the Kaiser lab was actually kind of cool.
That was sweet. There's some unique equipment there. I mean, it's not something you would want to use if you're training like an advanced person long term. I don't know what the strength limitations are on some of those machines, but the ability to change the resistance really quickly was kind of interesting.
I like the fact that it was the handle, especially like the old people. But people are listening, you don't know I'm doing all those hand gestures now. And the Kaiser machines, the OG ones, they had like actual machines you might not have seen, like a row machine. And what's really cool about it is like the plus and minus on the handle. And so we were working with older adults, and they sometimes don't know how much weight to lift. And so a lot of times they kind of baby into the set. And what's really convenient is that you can add weight as you do reps. And so with the older adults, it wasn't like, oh, now I got to change out the weights. It was like, no, you could just tap it and now you have more, or you could tap it and get less. And that was actually kind of a cool little feature for, I guess, lazy people like myself, and maybe people who don't have the time to want to on-rack a bunch of weights.
Yeah. I still remember when I was in that class, and we, we had like one or two people that we were personal training essentially, which was really a good system. I liked that for our undergrads now. I wish we had something like that here to get them a bit of hands-on exposure while they're still supervised, but I still remember having someone do maybe like a lunge or something like that, and no real concept of training and what's going on besides my own football background, and just being like, make sure you keep your knee back behind your toe. And then you being like, why is that? And be like, I don't know, because that's what my high school coach told me or whatever. And then now it's like everything I'm doing is almost a reflection of that statement, that you're like, you need to know, or you should be able to explain why you're having someone do something. And then everything I do now is like trying to teach people the why, or get them to understand the importance of it does matter to know the why.
Yeah, let's dive into that, because now you are on your road to be a scientist. You're on the path to be officially a scientist. I proclaim to be a scientist, but yet I've published no research, and I make grandiose assumptions at times that all scientists would get mad at me for. So you're actually going to be a real scientist. Let's talk about that real quick.
Yeah. So I came up to do my PhD at NDSU at the time, or when I was kind of figuring out if I was going to do my PhD or not. I was working as a full-time strength coach at the University of Louisiana Lafayette. Originally, when I had started down there, I had been working with football only, and then helped with some Olympic sports. And actually ended up taking over men's basketball during a transition period. And then the way it ended up, football staff got fired, and I ended up working with like the women's tennises of the world. And nothing against those sports, but I wasn't working with sports I was interested in. And it was kind of like a bit of a dead end type position, because in college strength conditioning, right, typically to get a new job, either you're just kind of randomly applying, or you're like following a staff, or one of your boys gets a job and you get to go with them. And I kind of ended up in this weird spot where that wasn't really going to happen. And so I was kind of looking at my future plans or whatever. And I thought, okay, well, if a PhD is going to take me 3 or 4 years, I'm interested in teaching. I'm interested in the science sides of things. If I'm, someone hiring a strength coach 3 or 4 years in the future, and I see a resume that has another 3 years of training these teams, or somebody that has a PhD, given, it basically costs the same amount of time either way. At the time, I thought like, I still want to be a college strength coach exclusively long-term. So perfect, I'll do the PhD, and that'll be more attractive option, to get whatever the fabled big time job or whatever, go make $700,000 at Iowa or something like that. So that's how it kind of started out. And I had never had any background with conducting research at all. There were opportunities to get involved at Iowa State, and maybe even I know like some of the other guys had some undergrad research helping out, like in physics and whatnot, for example. But I had never done any of that kind of stuff. And, I was playing football at Iowa State, so I didn't really have the time to do those kinds of things. And I didn't do a thesis. Basically I wrote like an annual training plan as a project or whatever. So I essentially had absolutely no research exposure besides, obviously having to see studies previously in some classes. And then I came up to NDSU, and part of the reason that I came is because I had a graduate assistant job working with research that would pay for my degree, of course, because nobody's trying to pay for more student loans than we have to, right? And so started getting involved with research, got involved in some cool studies. Like we did some like a microRNA testing, seeing if there's like microRNAs can predict whether people can lose weight or not, controlling for calorie deficit, like some interesting kind of research stuff. And doing all that and like writing my comprehensive exams and whatnot forced me to actually spend a lot of time reading the literature, which previously I don't want anything to do with. Like strength coaches or like people, anyone that's like I'm evidence-based or blah, 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 they have an idea of what the scientific literature is out there, but they're not reading studies all day long, or they're not really spending a lot of time looking at stuff. It's like nobody wants to do that. It takes so long and it's kind of boring to read.
It doesn't tell you anything sometimes. Like that's the fact of the matter is, like, people go there and they like, hey, all right, I'm going to read this study. It's going to tell me 3 or 4 sets of back squat. And you're like, wait, it didn't tell me that. And the conclusion is kind of nebulous. And I got to read another paper, right? So, not to interrupt, but it's that synthesis process that people don't like.
Yeah, really, for just a good example, really you need to conduct like a lit review to then get a sort of rough idea of guidance for most people, right? People perceive research as like, this is like the answer. And, that's just not the case. Like you have to look at all the evidence out there, which, what is good or bad evidence is a whole another conversation. But it's not as clear cut as people want it to be. And then, people kind of can take that and say, well, then none of it matters if it doesn't tell us anything in the first place. Yeah. It's kind of a little wormhole that you can get going down, something that I fight all the time, because I'm on this channel, especially on the TikTok stuff, where it's actually educational and not just, mess around funny videos on Instagram, trying to help people understand.
By the way, he undersold that. Adam has a TikTok page you can go check out. And that's actually one of the reasons why I really want to get him on here, because I found what he was doing on there to be very admirable and interesting in an area that is pure chaos and basically ocean trash. I would call TikTok at times. You don't know what you're going to bump into. Space garbage. Adam does a really good job of breaking down the research and certain things in there to be informative. And then on top of that, I want to make sure I get back to, but you can finish your thought in a second, but he does a really good job with a community building standpoint, putting his face out there and actually exposing himself to the masses as a person versus a man behind words. So go ahead. I'll let you finish. I just want to give you that plug.
Well, now I'm getting lost.
Well, you basically, we were talking about how the research model itself is something that is interpretive. And I think people misunderstand the research model and they think it's definitive versus it being on a spectrum of 0 to 100% confidence on any subject. And never will we ever reach 100% confidence. But as you build a model that has a framework of, I think it's more probable that this is the outcome, because again, research is based on statistical conclusions, which is based on probability, which is 3 standard deviations essentially, or maybe 2, depending on what you set the value at, outside of what would be the norm. And so you can tell that there is a significant difference for those people who remember the stats classes with 2 bell curves and they had the median line in the middle and it's a far enough apart, that statistical significance. And the whole point of that is, not to interrupt you, but is that when we reread research, and people who like research like myself and Adam, we kind of read it with the mindset of it being explorative. It's exciting. It's a new, maybe piece of information on the road to the, the treasure chest kind of thing. When people think about treasure hunting, you have one clue into the next, and it's kind of like an aggregation of clues, and you might make a wrong turn here and there, but that turn meant something later on. But versus going in there and being like, will I do 4 drop jumps or 5 drop jumps, or should I do a box squat? And then that just becomes bananas, because again, the core of what we're looking at, again, in all research, and this is kind of a mechanistic process, and then that mechanistic process typically extrapolated into population norms, which is why you get some deviation amongst norms, because, well, people are different and mechanisms operate in isolation when you do it in research versus it being in kind of a cumulative effect, the whole body doing lots of other stuff. So not to get too far ahead, but that's kind of some, the fun way I think about it.
Yeah. It's basically, rather than like this study, let's do this study to find the answer. It's more like, let's do this study and see what happens. And then we'll just kind of see what happens, and it may be not what we expect. And then based on what we see there we'll then design another study. And it's kind of like this step progression of, okay, let's kind of, further down the wormhole until eventually, there's enough of a body of literature on a certain topic that we say, okay, this is what we kind of generally see across the board, but there's always outliers and whatnot. And which is why it's so important, I think, for, what works for everybody else may not work for you. Even if it works for, 99% of people, it may not work for you. People respond differently to things. And it's upon yourself, or you have the responsibility to treat yourself as your own research experiment, essentially, and like I'm tracking like body weight training, calories, all that stuff out of personal curiosity. Obviously you don't have to do it that extreme, but with this notion of like, I'm interested in the science and for like population general, but almost in a separate sense. I'm also interested in just, treating myself as an experiment and just seeing what works over time, which I assume you are similar. You seem to train yourself with like different training methods. You always kind of trying new stuff out, seeing what works over time.
It's the excitement of research or information is a tool that you wield, and it's not a tool that is a true north compass. It is interpretive. And so that's why you have people in the research field, researchers, debate certain topics they both research, because there is a level of interpretation. And I think there's often a fallacy of absoluteness in research. And I think there are some I'm a research advocate, and I've gotten in trouble in arguments with a couple of researchers before, because I think there are lots of issues with the innate structure of the way the US sets up research, and how it's so heavily predominant with lots of people trying to get master's thesis, lots of people who are finishing a PhD, and the number of people who are actually the head researchers who are able to explore what they want versus managing 25 students or 15 students is far less. And so at times when you do that, the lens and the scope of a research field, not that it's a bad thing, but it just becomes much wider than concentrated. And it's not like, and one thing I'd love in the research field is if they had, like, this was the previous research that led to this. Like if you had a paper or a research document, you could read like a study, and it just simply had one study that said, hey, this is the previous page. So you could have a connection versus like, as an interpreter like myself, I'm spending time trying to like look at the dates, like what was the flow chart process of this? Like, why did they study this? And then what led to this, versus it being this kind of, at times when you open it up, it's just almost chaos. It's very disorganized if you just go on PubMed and try and find information for the most part.
Yeah. Well, and if you're like a cancer researcher, you're like researching some sort of like a giant public health concern, even though, maybe not training itself, but exercise in general, should be part of public health concern. But you get these huge grants and you can do these like series of research, and it can be structured like that. But then if you're done some videos recently on, people are like, oh, well, how does this study get funded, and like, where does the money come from? And it's like, well, it's like people like you and me that happen to be in organizations like the NSCA or whatever that care about getting big muscles, and it doesn't really have like a health benefit. And so, you're kind of fighting over these scraps of funding, and then you know, it can be challenging. It's not like you have like $500,000 a year to then do this beautiful series of research and, really tease things out. You almost have to hop around a little bit because
funding.
Yeah,
it's true. You got to do like, it's the classic. I was talking to someone, they're like, look, if we just put osteoporosis on our box jump study, I'm likely to get more money than if I'm to say it's for power development.
Yeah.
I might be able to throw it in like a subcategory of power development, but it's for like osteopenia or, any sort of muscle atrophy study. I'm going to get way more funding than if I'm going to say it's for athletes jumping high.
We are actually doing that right now. One of my buddies' dissertation is on like master's level cyclists and like their performance. And we're doing like basically like a Wingate type test and VO2 max on their bike. And these are like competitive cyclists, but it's a hand grip strength study and the big NIH grant for hand grip strength. And then we just happen to be sneaking in some bike performance metrics as well. And then we'll just write a separate paper about the bike stuff. But the funding itself comes from, NIH hand grip strength, health related information. So
yeah, it's really, again, that's like the untold world of research is like how this stuff actually gets done. People just like hope it like bubbles up like lava from a volcano, like, oh, research has appeared, versus like, oh, there's actually people doing it. There's the recruitment process, there's who you actually have access to and all that stuff. So I actually don't want to talk tons about that process. I love it, it's interesting, but I want to talk about something you're doing very cool, which is in line with that, which is your development of your TikTok world and your presentation of research on there. And I want to hear a little bit about how you got started on that, maybe some of the discomforts that come along with being on social media and presenting your face, and how you got over that. So let's hear about
it. So actually I started out on Instagram originally. I had never done TikTok or used TikTok. I thought it was some stupid kids app. I still remember back when they were like but originally it was like the Chinese company that owns it is trying to steal your information. I remember way back. And there was like 3 weeks where it wasn't on the App Store, and then it came back anyway. So I had this perception of like, it's just a bad deal. I don't want to mess with TikTok at all. And so originally it's just on Instagram, and started out the classic way that any former strength coach does, where you just post footage of yourself training, and then you write 4 paragraphs about, here's some takeaways. This is why we, included chains on our back squat today. That kind of stuff. And, and you get, and like your friends follow you, and, you're getting like 10 likes posts, and nobody's seeing it, and you're not really contributing anything, and nobody really gives a shit, basically. And so then eventually, like when I was growing up, I was involved in like theater and did a lot of like comedies in high school and whatnot. And so I'm interested in like acting and joking around, making funny videos. So I made I think like the first ever funny video that I ever made on Instagram or TikTok or whatever was one about like coaches telling their athletes like, it's important to sleep and nutrition and like, avoid these things. And then like it was me with like 2 monsters, and I was like coaches on their 6th monster and 7th lift group of the day, like doom, doom, doom. And it like and it kind of took off, and like, oh, people actually, people kind of think that's funny. And
those were funny. I like them.
Yeah, so I started making like a couple more, like kind of poking fun a little bit at being a strength coach, because it's something, it's like being a strength coach it's like one of the funniest professions, or one of the funniest, like most absurd professions. But when you're in it, you have to act like it's like super serious, like life or death stuff.
That's a great way to put it. I love the candidness. This is a weird ass profession.
It is. People, you're like making, like you're like chopping up apples and making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for the nutrition station. It's like, are the corners square? We're gonna win a national championship because of the way you make these sandwiches. It's kind of the perception. And so then all of a sudden, how
you do anything is how you do everything.
Everything,
how you do anything.
And so then you get outside the field, and you're like, you still got all your friends in it, and you're kind of like, you're talking to them on the phone. They're telling you stories about funny stuff that happened at work, and you're like, well, I think a lot of people would think that stuff's funny, but certain people can't really say, And so like, oh, I'm the guy on the outside now, I'll kind of poke fun. So I started making those funny videos, and they started doing fairly well. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, not really, there's people with like absurd millions of followers, but like for me, they did pretty well and started gaining some followers.
That's a good thing to mention, is like contextual appreciation of your, because sometimes people post it and they might get like 1,000 likes. They normally get 200, and they're like, oh, it's not 10,000.
Yeah.
Right. That's
I was
awesome that you
stoked.
appreciate. Yeah, that's
Yeah, I
good.
was stoked. I remember when I first finally made the TikTok, because one of my buddies would send me TikToks all the time, and like he'd send me way back some of the ones when they're like acting out what your D-line coach does, and it was like a guy shaking his seeds and like, well, all right, get the hands on him, that kind of stuff. And I was like, this is hilarious. You don't see this stuff on Instagram at the time because there wasn't reels yet. So I had downloaded it and I started like posting videos on both, the same funny videos on both. And I remember the first or second video I ever posted on TikTok got like, I don't know, 600 views. And I was like, this is it, this is incredible. 600 views, and it really felt like a success at the time, which is,
and that is a success.
Yeah. Like 0 followers,
people. That's pretty amazing.
Views. Wow. It's incredible. So I started posting that funny stuff. And then, at some point I had posted like a couple more, just, things about training, or like, maybe like a synopsis of like training day I did. And there's like it started to get a couple questions. And so then I kind of learned about like, comment replies. I didn't even know that was really a thing, to reply with video on TikTok. Started replying. People started to respond to those, started getting like, a little bit bigger following, still tiny in the grand scheme of things. And then in a couple months ago, in like maybe May, I don't know, I had like 2,000 followers on there. And I'd seen lots of people talking about like the whole like muscle lengths, training stuff in a shortened position, long position, people talking about targeting heads of such and such muscle. And so I had spent the whole spring semester teaching the very first functional anatomy class that exercise science students take at North Dakota State. And it's called kinesiology, but it's like functional anatomy, origin, insertion, function. And so I thought, okay, I already taught all this stuff. It's like the work is done. Why don't I share this kind of stuff, but in a really simplified way, so that just like the layperson can understand and help people kind of understand. So I basically just made a video that said, I'm going to start a new series, talking about short position, long positions, how you train muscles. I teach this. That was like the first time I ever really said anything about myself on there. So like, I teach this class, like I'm working on my PhD, because you see people that are like, here's what you should do for training, and they're like flexing in the beginning of the video, and you're like, oh, they know what they're talking about, they're flexing, they know training science. And so the first time I was like, well, I'm not like jacked like those kinds of people, so I'll show you that my brain is jacked, I guess. I don't know what you want to call that. And so then I posted that, and that thing like exploded, and I woke up and I gained like 10,000 followers overnight. Went from like 2 to 12,000 followers, and then it just like kept growing. So I did a whole series of like called muscle lengths, just going through all the trainable muscles in the body. And then people would ask all kinds of questions, and started doing, video replies off of that, and trying to give people, I don't know, conservative, realistic answers to their questions, and not giving like this is the best exercise for XYZ, or like, we'll talk about the supplements in a bit, because it's kind of the same concept, but just trying to give people like an honest assessment of what we know, cumulatively as like a field of exercise science, I guess, and trying to make it very understandable. So we went through that whole series, answered questions, and then.
And let me stop you there for a second, because I think what's really important is for people listening to this, it's not like you sat down and were like, what is the best way to create all this new information so I can have a TikTok page? It was like, I talk about this quite a bit. I haven't actually talked about it on a podcast, so this is good timing. But often, for lack of better words, we get in a pissing contest of intelligence for a specific area with the like 0.001%, where a bunch of strength coaches go to a conference to talk to strength coaches that sound smart with strength coaches, for strength coaches who don't buy anything from strength coaches. And so a lot of times you accumulate all this knowledge, and you think you want to showcase yourself to like, oh, who am I smarter than? Let me do like a presentation here. But really, you just turn around, because you have so much information that you think is mundane, that you think is entry level, that you think wouldn't impress anyone in your field, which is extremely helpful and impressive to all these people who don't have that background. And what I mean by that is you already had a wealth of resources that you did not need to, accumulate. And a lot of times people don't respect the information or the resources they have, because they compare it to their peers. Oh, would my peer think this is something super unique? Well, no, they would not find maybe like an origin insertion conversation to be super useful in a bicep curl at a strength conditioning conference. But your average gym goer might be very confused, and they might not have that information. So while you think a certain piece of information in one context is extremely common and not very scarce, therefore it's not very valuable, in another context is extremely scarce and extremely valuable. And so it's not like you were like, oh, I'm now going to have to learn a whole new class to teach on TikTok. You're like, I'm already doing this. Yeah. Why don't I just post it?
Yeah. And it's, people say that a good reflection of how well you actually know the topic is, can you explain it to somebody who has absolutely no context in a very simple way? And so it's almost like teaching it in these little 2 to 3 minute snippets on TikTok makes you a better educator and makes you, a little better informed about the topic itself. And honestly, I mean, in talking to other strength coaches, like high level strength coaches, to be honest, they may not really know that stuff anyways. Like you can get away with a lot of stuff and, get to what people perceive as like a high level without this very simple base knowledge. So it's more valuable than people would make it think or make it seem, I guess.
It's really cool to see as well that you're putting your face out there. So a lot of times people are afraid to actually put their face out there and speak. I think come on, we all look in the mirror. We're always not all that most happy with how we look, especially on social media. I don't think I've seen a person on social media that's made me feel better about myself. Like, oh, look at that person. That jacked dude's not as jacked as me. Like, you know what I mean? And that's actually a really big hindrance for some people. I know for myself at times, it's always even little things like, oh, I had a piece of food stuck in my damn tooth when I was doing that. And I think it's really cool that you're putting your face out there, because what it's doing from a brand standpoint is people who care about you are more, I want to call valuable, because it's a weird word to say about a follower, but like are more valuable, for lack of better words, because they care about you and not just the content you provide. Like when Joe Rogan speaks, it's not, you would recognize Joe Rogan and go see Joe Rogan. But if Joe Rogan would just write a book, you care about the words and the information. You don't care if Joe Rogan wrote the book. You just care the book is written. And so the fact that you're on the camera is very important. And I think it's a very smart idea. Something I did not do at all early on in my social media world.
I remember. I still remember your first ever, like, I should introduce myself, was when me and you and Derek took a picture in Bo's old weight room in front of like the Iowa State strength and conditioning in the back.
Yeah.
We're like, hey, we made the big time. We're on his page.
That was like one of the first times I put myself out there, because it was a weird, like, am I good enough or not good enough? Especially in those times, like that was like young social media land where it was very confrontational, and the only people that followed me were strength coaches. It was kind of a weird, it was more blog than it was, I guess, dynamic content like it is now. Do you plan on taking some of this content and putting it on YouTube, by the way? Do you have a YouTube page? You should put it on YouTube Shorts. If you haven't done that, you should take all your TikToks. You should download them all again and re-upload them every single day onto a YouTube Short. I promise you. It takes no effort. It's a horizontal plan to make sure your content goes elsewhere. YouTube Shorts, download it, repost it. You'll thank me, or even post it as a video. It's amazing how well those do for some reason on YouTube.
I have a, like, Bradley Barbell is, I have it secured as a YouTube channel or whatever. I've never put anything on there it's kind of honestly like what you're talking about, putting yourself in front of the camera. It's like, even though it's the same thing, you're literally posting the same thing. I don't know, something about like, you feel like, okay, I feel like a little bit established in TikTok. I'm comfortable posting there, but like, even to post the educational stuff I put right now, to post that on like Instagram Reels feels a little weird, because like people that follow me on Instagram are like strength coaches, people that I like look up to, and
they're never buying anything from you. Like they're not actually like,
it shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter, but there's this weird feeling of kind of like what you're describing, and putting yourself out there. Like it feels like it will be confrontational, even though it probably won't, I guess, And
it's honestly, I struggle personally, like filming myself. It's like TikTok's easier because you're replying. It's almost like the structure of TikTok it's intimate in a way, which is a very weird thing to say about TikTok, because it's also the least intimate platform ever, but you can directly communicate with it. And it's very much more real time. Instagram, it's a slow bake, and same with YouTube. You put it out there and it might get seen over a day, 2 days, 3 days. TikTok, you can post 30 times in a day. It's more of a Twitter feed than it is almost a Instagram feed. So it's interesting though, because like myself, I like, if I'm outside in public and like some neighbors down 2 houses down, I won't film. I'm like, oh my God, they might see me filming. I get like so nervous. I'm like, this is my entire business. Like I should, and if I saw someone else, I'd be like, oh, that's cool. They're grinding.
good
They're
for
trying,
them.
yeah,
Good
they're
for
trying
them.
to do
Yeah.
something. And I'm like, you're so embarrassing. You're gonna be an influencer in the wild, filming
Yeah.
yourself. Shame on you as I go hide inside and make my video.
Yeah.
That's something I've been trying to overcome.
Yeah.
You know,
That's something I've been working on recently. If you've seen any of the recent videos, you'll kind of recognize there's a recurring place where I'm walking and talking, and it's like the very top floor of NDSU's Wellness Center with an indoor track, you know. And it's kind of the same thing. Like I'm getting comfortable. Like people can see me, but they're not close to me, so they can't hear me. And I'm like, okay, I'm trying to get steps in because there's only so much time in the day. Trying to be a little more efficient. Like, okay, let's make some TikToks, answer some people's questions as I'm getting my walking in, you know. But same thing. I'm talking and like, you know, you mess up all the time. You got to start over your little clip or whatever. But
oh, that's always the worst.
yeah, and you'd be talking and like, oh, someone got close to me. I got to stop. I'll start that over. And you know,
I'm on FaceTime. I'm actually on FaceTime.
Yeah, you want to like hide it. You're like, oh no, I'm not making a TikTok right now. Don't worry about me.
Me? No. Oh no, not me. It's like some old lady too. He doesn't even know what's going on. She's like,
Yeah.
oh, no idea. But you're like, oh no, you're
Don't
gonna
worry,
out
it's
me.
not. Yeah, it's
As I post it to a social media platform where thousands will
thousands of
see
people
me,
to see.
but one person in real life. Oh no. I
Yeah.
hope not.
Yeah, it's so weird. It's an interesting little mental game that you play there. Of it shouldn't, you know. Well, I don't want to say shouldn't, but you know, it doesn't really make sense to share with thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, millions of people, and have no problem at all posting it. But then to be afraid of the one person seeing you, you know, right there. It's a strange phenomenon.
So give me 2 takeaways if I was going to be starting a new TikTok page. You are talking to a younger Bradley. He's not Adam.
No.
He's Bradley because he's younger.
No.
Adam's talking to Bradley. What would be 2 bits of advice you'd give them? Short and sweet.
Short and sweet. I would say talk about things you actually understand. Because I think people, you see people make new things and they're almost just like, you know, regurgitating whatever pages with millions of followers. They're just kind of like saying the same stuff and regurgitating it, you know, and there's not, first, you know, it's not unique because they're not sharing any new information. But, you know, as soon as somebody asks a question or like if you say something wrong, like you fucked, you know, because you just outed yourself that you don't know what you're talking about. So that's something like you'll see on my stuff all the time. I'll say, somebody asks a question and it'll be like about, I don't know, injury or like a disease or something like that. And I'll say, you know, sorry, that's outside of my scope. Like you know, I would recommend looking into or like asking such and such kind of person or something like that. And, you know, I think that's a trap that people can do, especially early on. They want to like prove themselves and show that they're like, you know, the rat race of like, I am the smart person. And it's almost a better option to demonstrate what you don't know. And then people, you know, if you establish like a boundary, then people are like, oh, okay, I trust this person within this limit. So that'll be the first one. Just actually talk about stuff you understand and not like force yourself to make things up or, you know, get outside of that. And then the second thing would be just to not be afraid about it. I mean, like we're talking about, you know, it seems like this big daunting thing at first, and it's just something you get used to, people seeing you, you know. I still remember like the first time I posted something that people didn't like and had like a lot of negative comments and people saying like some pretty mean shit, you know, and it fucked me up for a little while. Like I'd never had any experience like that. Like I'd posted something like, I don't remember what video it was. I posted it like before I was going to bed, you know. I'm like, oh, I just check my phone real quick. And it was, oh, it's kind of blowing up. Well, what are these? Wow, a lot of comments. And it's just like, you know, go fuck yourself. Like, what are you talking about? That kind of stuff. And you're like, holy shit, like mess my, you know, I couldn't like sleep that night. And,
yeah.
So, but now I'm, you know, you get used to it. And this point, it's like, oh, okay, people are mad at what I said. Like, perfect. That's just feeds the algorithm, I guess.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Go for it.
You know,
it's funny because you get 1,000 likes and 2 dislikes, and you care more about 2 dislikes than 1,000 likes, and you're like, oh,
way more, yeah.
Like some the other day screenshotted my post I made. I had like AJ was doing like a dumb like the Bulgarian split squat or something, and I had like some tips on it. And then they comment and they post on their feed. They don't tag me, but someone sent it to me and it said, "Didn't mention patellar tracking. Qualify who you listen to." I'm like, I could have mentioned like 1,000 other
things, yeah.
Like surface or height of stand. And it's funny because you take it so offensive when you read that. And I'm like, well, this post has like 3,000 likes and a lot of positive stuff. And some guy made himself look like a fool by posting it on his page and talking down on me. And it's not like that it's kind of embarrassing for that guy because you think someone's going to now train with him because you talk down on someone. Like that's also kind of silly.
Yeah, and people misconstrue, like the goal. I would assume the goal for most people is to actually provide actionable info and like actually be of some use and like help people out. And for most people,
I don't think that's most people. I really don't. I've become very pessimistic.
That's what I would hope, I guess, for like people like us, like something you can actually take away is, I guess, what I should say.
I'm willing to go on a limb and say our social sphere on social media has become almost more about showing that someone else is dumb and hopes that means that probability on the bell curve says that you're right. Like if you like have a distribution of like, imagine if you had a distribution of everyone just posted on content and on a bell curve, some people are right, some people are more wrong, and some people are kind of on average. By like showing that I'm wrong, they're like hoping that means like on odds, right. I might be more right.
Yeah.
It's kind of like this weird, like assumption model. They're working with humans and like instead of just being like, hey, like this is what I think and this is what I would have added, they just would rather be like, this guy's an idiot. And you're like, well, does that make you smart? I'm like, well, if he's the idiot, someone's got to be smart. Like,
well, and some of the algorithms seem to feed that. Like, it seems like the controversial or confrontational stuff does tend to do well on, especially on TikTok, which is kind of a frustrating, people want to see it.
I have one post on my Always an Athlete page, which is of a Russian high jumper doing a drill. And he looks like, would be young Bruce Jenner or Caitlyn Jenner now. And people are arguing as to whether or not they should be called Caitlyn or Bruce Jenner, but it's not.
Has nothing to do with the post.
Not either of them. It is a Russian high jumper who's jumping that looks like, Caitlyn Jenner when she was younger. So Bruce Jenner. And so and they're arguing on it and my post keeps blowing up and people are just like on a fight, but it's not, it's just a Soviet high jumper. And it says like from USSR, like on the bottom of it.
Like, I guess thanks
keeps pubbing it.
Thanks for the stimulus on the algorithm, but it's just missing the point of the post.
But it's just, like you said, it's just like it must be promoting to people who just want to argue over that.
Yeah.
Like I had a post once that was like that, and I made a post, and all I got was negative comments. It was people just like, it must have been just promoting to people that commonly comment negatively on these posts. It was a very like mundane post. I remember it being something like, I don't know, like I jumped on a box or something, and they're like, "This guy's an idiot," and they're like, just like berate. I ended up deleting the post because I didn't want to get any more notifications about how stupid I was. I'd be like, "What is this?" And then I wanted to have like likely to comment, "He's an idiot." Let's send it to these 40 people.
Yeah,
they're all just like bombing you.
Yeah. Well, what we were just saying before about the people that do want to provide actionable info, or the people that do want to like help people out, I guess to then like people will always comment on, like you said, about what about teletracking, what about blah 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 blah. You didn't mention that, and it's like, well, the point is to be like simple and understandable, or at least simple enough that people can understand. And this isn't like, I'm not trying to write a 3-minute textbook about everything you ever possibly need to know, but people kind of hop on it like that. It's like, well, actually, what I think is blah blah blah.
So I think the moral of the takeaway is like, look, do you know what you're doing, why you're doing it? If you're comfortable doing it, then the comments, good or bad, shouldn't really provide much influence. I do want to have a little lightning round here with you.
Yeah, sure.
Some fun here, because I don't want to make this podcast go too long for our listeners. I try and keep it within 45 minutes. Does Bigfoot exist?
If you ask my girlfriend's family, yes. If you ask me, no.
Okay. Can't get an answer why. For you, why you don't think it exists, Kyle? I'll follow up with it. It's a pseudo lightning round.
I don't believe in like any of that stuff, like Bigfoot, ghosts. I don't know.
Okay.
Is there a heaven? I don't know. All right. I'm like very material here kind of guy.
How about okay, aliens? This is very much
I say yes on that. I think it's highly improbable that there's not. Like, how could there not be?
There's a lot of government info recently that kind of points towards the existence.
That's what I'm saying. And that's just within our little, solar system. Like, what about everything else out there?
And I did make an argument that if Bigfoot were to exist, the highest probability is that he is an alien.
That would make sense.
I think that'd be the most logical outcome. If he does exist, it's because he's an alien. That's why you can't find him and see him, because he leaves. Whatever. All right. For $1 million, you have to pick one of the following challenges. Which would you try and complete? You have to eat a bathtub full of pudding in 3 days, or eat one full leather shoe in a single day?
I do the pudding. When I was at Iowa State, I used to eat one of the big salad bowls of vanilla pudding every
You
single
think
night.
you can eat a bathtub full of pudding?
3 days? Yeah. Oh yeah.
A bathtub.
Bathtub. Yeah.
That's got to be about 700 pounds of pudding.
We're gonna get it done.
No one see the leather shoes is actually the right answer.
Well, that's your perception, Max.
Because you would heat it up, you'd bake it, you'd really get it down. And I think you could, it's digestible. I'm assuming all aspects of the leather shoe. I'd put it in a burger. I maybe would blend it in a shake and have a day. I think I could eat a single leather shoe in a day. I'm pretty sure I could eat.
You don't think, well, if you're going to cook down the leather shoe, then you have to be able to like cook down the pudding and do some things to that too.
Yeah, but you still have 700 pounds. It's a math issue.
I don't know. Maybe it's when it's just ash and there's no liquid in it.
you're just inhaling your shoe. You just
know.
burn it down.
Like the cinnamon challenge or whatever that used to be going around.
Everyone always picks the pudding when I say this one. And then when they think about it, they realize it's impossible to eat a bathtub full of pudding. I'm just saying right now, you picked it. That's the choice you went. That was your $1 million choice. All right. We're playing deal or no deal. Okay. All right. You have picked a case. You know how the deal or no deal works.
Yep.
Okay. You pick a case. You work all the way down on the board. Now there's 2 cases left. There's one in front of you, the one you have on the board. There's $1 million and $5. Do you switch your case if you're offered the opportunity?
Well, if there was 2 up there and one,
there's one for you, and one out there. There's 2 left. That's all. So one has $1 million and one has $5.
I stick with what I have.
Why?
Because the probability is the same. And in that case, the probability is the same.
It's actually not.
Well, that's what I was trying to think about. I was like, wait a minute, is it or is it not?
It's not, because when you picked your case, it was 1 in 20. 1 in 20 had $1 million, right? Because you pick out of 20 cases.
Oh, you picked in the first place. That's right. I forgot how that even came to that.
You just forgot how deal or no deal works.
I guess.
So the question is, would you go with the statistics and say there's a 50% chance that the other case has $1 million, or would you go with your gut and keep the one you picked?
I want to go with my gut, but if I was a football coach, I'd go for it on 4th down when the stats say to do so. So that's that's a little bit of a toss up there. I'm going to go with the gut on this one.
Oh, interesting. It's an interesting one because, right, the statistics say one is a 5% chance and one's a 50% chance.
Yeah.
But everyone's like, oh, how can you? It would hurt a lot to switch it.
Well, isn't it the same choice in the end though? Because either you're picking one that you already have, or it's almost like they're both up there at the end.
But it's not, because when you picked it, because now when there's 2 cases left, when you picked it, you don't know, but one of the 2 has 1 million, right? So the one case that hasn't been opened has a probability of 1 in 2. The one previously was 1 in 20. So you can't ignore the fact that even though all the other cases were moved, it was picked from a cohort where it's 1 in 20. And this is being picked from a cohort where there's just 1 in 2.
But what's the difference between it's almost the same decision as if you put that back up there and the final decision is, okay, pick one of these 2. Because if you're picking the one, because it's as if you picked the one that was up there.
Because it's a variable statistic. It's of where the cohort originated from. So like you can't, because you have opened and you picked it from a 1 in 20 grouping.
Yeah.
It's an interesting mind mess. It's my theory why humans can't understand statistics. We're not built evolutionarily to understand statistics at all.
No.
And I have a theory behind why we struggle with it. And this is just a fun example because like I struggled with it for like a week and a half, and I ended up watching, was it like 1 Blue 2 Red, or was it like a math channel, like Number File or something? And they broke it down, and I was like, oh, how am I supposed to understand that? But it makes sense.
I'll continue to mentally struggle with statistics and keep a good stats person as a co-author on my papers.
That's a good one though. It's a fun one because it really messes with you, because it's about the Bayesian modeling, essentially, like the context in which you selected it.
Yeah.
So knowing that it was 1 in 20, but now that box was still picked from the 1 in 20 cohort. So it has to be, it doesn't change statistics. Even if you picked everything else, it never changes the fact that's 1 in 20.
It's 1 in 20.
But because this one over here has never been picked, right? It's still when you go to that last stage, it is a 1 in 2 chance. So it's a 50% chance because it's never been picked out of the cohort.
But the person that ends up sticking with it if they did that enough times, it would still end up 50% of $1 million.
So you can
right?
you can do it. No, so you can do it. And a fun way to do it is you can take cards. All right.
Yeah.
Take 7 cards, put them out in front, or you take 4. But you put more cards you put out, the more you'll have, like, say, a larger dispersion because the percentage is less. And you can do it yourself where you can play deal or no deal. And you can like pick one out, a card, make sure the number's like 1 through 10. And you can flip through it and then get down to the last card. And do you want to flip it or not? And you can write down the stats and you can see how many times it's that card you picked is higher than the other card.
And the practical outcome is that it actually is
I did.
Not 50%.
It'll blow your mind.
Got to do this.
It's like math magic.
And I've heard about it before, and I've always figured like, yeah, it makes sense. The stats guys know what they're talking about, but then to actually like think about practical applications, you're like, that can't be right.
No way. You're like, I kept doing it. I'm like, this is not possible. How is 50-50?
This is rigged. Yeah.
It's 1 and 2. But you have
crazy.
to have like you have to put like a 1 through 10 scale of it.
Yeah.
And the key is though, you have to get down to the part where you have $1 million on the board, because you could select out $1 million along the way. Right. In the situation we're talking about where it's the $1 million is still on the board, because you could argue like, oh, if it's 500,000 or 300,000 and the bank offers you 400,000, you might as well just take the bank. Take the middle ground. So, all right. Last one. Would you rather look extremely jacked and be kind of weak? Or would you rather be looking kind of weak, but be very strong?
Probably look jacked, because
thank you. I appreciate that.
Especially on social media. Like, what is it? Get a couple fake plates. Life's good.
I love the business mindset of social media. Totally. Absolutely.
Well, I mean, it's a lot more fun. I don't know. I think about like how fun it would be to start over as a beginner and, see adaptations from training like these low weights. Now, it'd be kind of the same case. Like, it's kind of annoying. Like, we got to build up to like, we're working at like 365 on squat today for sets of 10. Oh my gosh. I missed the days when it was like 225. It was so much faster and easier.
And the next week could be 250. And the next week could be
Eventually end up in the same place.
Oh, well, Adam, thank you for being on. I appreciate you coming on here. Where can we find you on social medias?
Everything is at Bradley Barbell, BRADLEY. People always ask me that. Is it LEY or LY? And I've never seen a Bradley with LY in my life.
LY either.
People
Why
always
would
ask
people ask that.
I don't know. But at Bradley Barbell across all platforms.
His name's Adam.
And my name is Adam.
I appreciate you all listening. Thank you. Take care. And I hope
Thanks, Max.
you all enjoy. Appreciate you, Adam.